about to start. Can't talk. And everyone can hear me, right? Okay, good morning, everyone. It's nice to see all of you here. I'm grateful that all of you could make it. My name is Sarah Levin, and I am the Executive Director of Jimena. I have the privilege of introducing today's program, and my introduction, per the request of the Jimena team, might be a little bit longer than normal because it's important to give a bit of a background. So please bear with me. I'll go as fast as I can. I do see some new faces here today, so I just want to let everyone know that Jimena is a San Francisco-based organization, and our mission is to achieve universal recognition for the heritage, history, and rights of Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews. Most people really don't know much about Jimena's history. So just to give you a little bit of background, we were launched right after September 11th to bear witness to the personal stories of the 1 million Jewish refugees from the Middle East and North Africa. And we really started as a storytelling organization. We had no other choice because at that time, scholars and authors, activists and educators rarely spoke of or talked about or educated on behalf of the 1 million Jewish refugees from the Middle East. And our founders understood that any activism or Jewish education initiative that excludes Mizrahi and Sephardic history is incomplete, and that we can't properly teach our students or include our students in larger communal efforts and in education initiatives that focus on the Middle East and North Africa and the Jewish people without including Mizrahi and Sephardic history and heritage. So fast forward 20 years since those early days when we had like a handful of former Jewish refugees traveling to schools and to campuses throughout the United States, just sharing their personal stories. That was how we started, and that was how Jimena operated for a number of years. But since then, we've grown in a multitude of directions and capacities, and now we're at the point of having the privilege of serving as a national organization that is educating and advocating on behalf of the 1 million Jewish refugees and their Mizrahi and Sephardic descendants and ancestors. In 2019, we piloted our Journey to the Mizrach curriculum here in the San Francisco Bay Area with the support of the San Francisco Jewish Community Federation. The Journey to the Mizrach curriculum is basically a simple 12-part curriculum. It has 12 lesson plans. But it's been utilized now by over 800 educators in like 7 or 8 countries around the world. We were actually quite surprised by how quickly it spread and how it has been utilized by so many educators. And this really attested to the need for more content like what we produced. Since the launch of that curriculum project, we've received ongoing requests from schools and educators, not just in the United States, but around the world, for more content, for more support, and for guidance related not only to content integration, but also into creating and shifting school cultures to become more inclusive of Mizrahi and Sephardic students and families. So in 2023, we were awarded a Covenant Signature Grant to help develop a comprehensive toolkit to help teachers in schools and administrators better integrate Sephardi content and families into their schools. So we developed a compendium of recommendations, strategies, and resources to help educators learn about Sephardi Mizrahi heritage and shape inclusive school environments. I want to preface all this by saying that this guide is by no means an end-all be-all. Every school has different needs, and literally every sentence, every reference, and every recommendation in this guide can be fleshed out into all different types of trainings, courses, and even degrees. I've had a few people say to me, well, we don't, what further interventions are necessary after you distribute this guide? Because once this guide is readily available, what's the need for more? We know that there's a need for so much more, that this is just a start. This would be like the first toolkit on Holocaust education being distributed nationally, and then there being no follow-up and no additional trainings, no additional interventions. And this isn't just a one-time, we're not focused on just a one-time historical event, we're focused on the millennia of contributions from Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews. Our hope, our sincerest, deepest hope is that eventually there will be some systemic changes in Jewish higher educational institutions. So our institutions who are instructing and in teaching future educators about these subjects are equipped and prepared, and that this is a regular component of all of our Jewish higher ed institutions in preparing future Jewish educators to teach on behalf of all Jews. Including obviously Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews. So today we're going to take a dive into the toolkit and have a walkthrough of it with Dr. Ilana Reback-Rand, who wrote the section on the recommendations for school culture. Ilana is an amazing educator, scholar, researcher, and thinker, and I feel so lucky that Jimena gets to work with her on a few different really important projects. Ilana holds a PhD in Jewish education and an MA in curriculum and teaching. She consults and researches on topics related to the intersection of Jewish education, curriculum development, inclusion, school culture, and religious practice. And she currently serves as the Educational Initiatives Project Coordinator for the Strauss Center for Torah and Western Thought at Yeshiva University. Ilana is perhaps the only academic that I'm aware of whose research has focused on the social and emotional learning experiences of Sephardi students in the New York region. So I want to add one other personal anecdote, which I also don't typically do, but I feel it's important in this context. I'm a half Sephardi, half Ashkenazi Jew, and I grew up going to public schools. When I was in Hebrew school growing up, I never once learned anything about my father's Sephardi heritage. The only place where it was reflected back to me was in the home of my grandparents and when I was with my uncles and with my father, and in the Sephardi synagogue that we went to from time to time growing up, where my father was bar mitzvahed. I feel a tremendous privilege that Jimena now is able to give educators and administrators and parents a set of tools that would have impacted, I think, many Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews from my generation to not be disconnected, but to learn more, because we didn't all grow up in enclaves and we didn't all grow up in close, tight-knit communities. And not only for the inclusion of Sephardi, I feel it's important not only for the inclusion of Sephardi students, but because I truly believe and I know that our Jewish students are not being properly educated if they're not learning these subjects, not as an add-on addition, but as an interspersed, interwoven element of every single unit that they're accessing in Jewish schools, and in informal education as well. So I will ask that you please keep your computers on mute. We encourage conversation and discussion and questions. So please put all of your comments and questions in the chat, because it's just an easier way for Ilana and our team to respond. And I also want to say hello to Sapir Taib, who's Jimena's program director. She can help any of you if you have issues or questions. And of course, Ty Al-Hadef, who is our director of education. And Ty really is the point person for this work at Jimena, not me. Tomorrow, Ty is going to be giving a walkthrough of the actual content recommendations. Today is focused on school culture. So without further ado, I'm going to go on mute and welcome Ilana. Thank you.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure and a privilege to work with the whole Jimena team on this project. It was also a lot of fun. So thank you for that. I wanted to give a little bit of a background on my professional life and how I got here. I am an Ashkenazi Jew, born and raised in Ashkenazi institutions. And when people ask me how I got involved in this subject, I really just say simply that I grew up in Queens in the 90s. So for those of you who are familiar with that area, the leadership of Queens touts that it's the most ethnically diverse place on earth. And in the 90s, there were a lot of demographic changes in the area where I grew up. In my elementary school class, we had Jews from all throughout the world. Some of them were themselves born in other countries. Some of them were first generation Americans. And I just thought that this is what all schools were like. And then as I got older and I began teaching in Jewish schools in Queens, I began to notice that socially and emotionally, many of the students from Sephardi backgrounds were experiencing school differently than their Ashkenazi classmates. Whatever that meant, it was different somehow. And that's how I began this course of study. My doctoral work for my dissertation was focused on the social emotional experiences of Sephardi students in predominantly Ashkenazi schools. I looked at schools in the New York and LA areas, and without going into too much detail, what I found is that the nature of school culture initiatives and curricular initiatives in K through 12 do have lifelong impacts in terms of how people feel about the development of their Sephardic identity and their views on the Jewish community in general. And for students themselves, what I found was that students who experienced higher levels of discontinuity, meaning there's a difference in the behavior at home and in school, the students who had a higher level of discontinuities related to customs of Sephardi and Ashkenazis and Ashkenazim, they were more likely to experience lower levels of school belonging. So bridging the gaps and having students feel as though their home lives and their customs are represented in school really does have significant emotional impacts. And the research, not my research specifically, but research on school belonging has also shown that students who report greater levels of school belonging are also less likely to demonstrate at-risk behaviors like abuse, drug addiction, mental health issues, and they're more likely to exhibit positive academic outcomes as well as social emotional outcomes. So this project is about Sephardi Mizrahi students. It's also about helping all students in Jewish day schools feel as though they belong to the school community. So that's a little bit about me. I came at my work in my dissertation and for Jemena here from an organizational culture perspective. When I think about institutions and school culture, it doesn't only mean we're looking at things like arts and music and things that we often associate with culture. When I talk about culture from an organizational standpoint, we're really talking about the assumptions and the values that underlie the institution. So for, I don't know, 100 years, whenever the first day school was developed, for the most part, Jewish day schools in the United States were founded for and by Ashkenazic communities. Not because they were actively excluding Sephardic communities, but just because demographically, that's who was, for the most part, in the United States. There were Sephardim in the United States, since before there was a United States. In terms of population numbers, however, since the late 19th century, Ashkenazim really did dominate in terms of demographics, which meant that the people who were founding institutions of Jewish learning were more likely to be Ashkenazic. They were also more likely to be educated themselves in Ashkenazic institutions. Sorry, please put yourself on mute if you're not. Thank you so much. And that means that they were founding these institutions with the assumptions about what Judaism looked like from an Ashkenazic lens. And when they would look around the street and would see a Jewish person, more often than not, that person would be an Ashkenazic person. So when schools were founded according to these assumptions, that means that the underlying assumptions of the school are then going to generate the assumptions in those students because there's an iterative process. School culture can be understood as the underlying assumptions, sometimes the unconscious assumptions that govern an institution. And those unconscious assumptions impact norms of behavior and also specific behaviors that students embark on, that parents embark on, that affect how people in the school, in the administration, in the faculty interact with students. And then if those assumptions are practiced in behavioral ways on a day-to-day basis, that in turn then creates more of those assumptions, because the students who are raised in that environment see the way that everybody behaves and assumes that that's how things are, that's how things should be. In the last however many decades, the demographics of Jewish day schools have been changing, but they're still in institutions, for the most part, that were founded by Ashkenazim. So the way that we're approaching this toolkit is not to say that, oh, those Ashkenazim, they didn't care about the Sephardi students. That is completely not our approach here. But if the demographics of Jewish day schools are changing, then those assumptions have to be shaped and have to account for those changing demographics. So the idea behind the toolkit is for educators to identify areas of growth and to then use resources to help tailor different adjustments to the school culture that are very specific to their own school communities. We are looking to create cultural changes that work with the existing school culture, meaning we have designed a set of recommendations from the curriculum and from just day-to-day policies that are designed to be adjusted and personalized to each institution. We're looking at this toolkit as an expansion rather than a substitution. The idea here is to make things more inclusive, not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's look at what schools are doing well and then think about how we can make them even better. So I will pause for questions. Anybody has? I see Naomi. Naomi, you're on mute.
Okay. Yeah, so the question is for day schools with the limited resources, in terms of access to things like, recordings of like nusach is what I'm thinking of, like prayer and melodies is one I am concerned about, especially. Access to that, if staff doesn't know it, can they learn it from a recording somewhere? Like it's not always on the parents of Mizrahi to send to pass down.
Right.
Like, what can schools do? Yeah.
Definitely. So I'm not sure, Ty, did we put recordings of Nusach specifically on here? You're muted, Ty.
We have a lot of, thanks for the question. Great. And always there's more to add to the website. We definitely have a lot of recordings based around songs for the holidays. One that there was a website that I was hoping we'd still be able to use that may no longer exist, that had like really parasha readings and maftirim and Haftarah, all in. There was an Iraqi site, there was an Iraqi version and a Yemenite version and a Turkino version. I'm not sure that that site exists again, but I'm willing to check it out. But as far as for holiday resources, I think we have a lot of songs that would be useful for you.
Thank you.
I will just add that while we do have a very robust selection of resources on the toolkit, it is by no means comprehensive, and it's also not final. We are hoping that this is a first stage and that we can constantly add to the toolkit as new things come up, as new things are made available to people, or as educators express needs about what they want. So that is definitely something that we can file away to add in the next time we edit the site. Thank you so much. Oh, question. Okay. I'm going to answer the question that's in the chat as I go. So there are basically two purposes for putting the site together. We already spoke about the need for broadening the scope of what is included in school content and to enhance school culture so that students and families do feel this sense of belonging, and so that the assumptions of the school do not assume that all Jews look one way, so that the assumptions of the school can shift to account for the diversity of the Jewish community in the school. The other more broad thinking goal of this toolkit is not just on behalf of the Sephardi Mizrahi students and their families, but really on behalf of all of the students and all families. Because until relatively recently, if people did not personally know Sephardi Jews, they might not have had access to the rich culture and heritage of Sephardi Jews, just because maybe the resources weren't available. They would not have been able, 20, 30 years ago to take a virtual tour of synagogues in Northern Africa, for example. And now these resources are available. And how wonderful is it that we have the opportunity to show students how diverse and rich Judaism and Jewish culture can be. And I think especially now in a post-October 7th world, it's more important than ever to show children just how much they should be proud of Jews throughout the world and how connected they can be to Jews who come from a whole range of backgrounds. And in order to really change the school culture, it requires all of the stakeholders in the school to work together, because a culture cannot change if it's one teacher or one school administrator or even one lay leader. Changing the assumptions of an organization and the ways that the policies are enacted is really an all hands on deck sort of situation. So the way that we designed this toolkit was not just for teachers, although that is the largest section in the toolkit, but we've also provided recommendations for school leaders, for social emotional support staff, for programming staff, and for parents, and for lay leaders, so that people have a common hub that they can go to when they're looking for resources that they can use to work together on shaping the school culture. I'm now going to share my screen to give a more specific view of the toolkit. Okay. Thumbs up. Can we all see? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so when you log on to the website, you'll see this beautiful main page. First, we have our goal and mission, which I've already touched on. So we don't need to read through the whole thing, but the two primary goals I think of as more local and then more global. So more locally, it's to help Jewish educators develop a school culture that reflects the increasing diversity of local Jewish communities, and that is inclusive of students and families of all Jewish backgrounds. And that's really going to be about each school finding ways to adapt its own culture to include its own students and families. And then more broadly, it's to help educators provide students with a richer and more expansive understanding of Jewish communities and identities in the United States. There are while contemporary communities that we're focusing on that are based in the United States, there's obviously a very, very long story, thousands of year old heritage that we are including as well. So that's the mission. We also included a section asking who are Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews. Now, in some of my research, the answer that I've come across is that there is no one answer. And you can ask 2 or 3 people in the same family, whether they're Sephardi, whether they're Mizrahi, how they're finding Sephardi or Mizrahi, and you're going to get a whole host of answers. And our response to this was basically to say, yes, we will take all of those answers because our goal here is to be as expansive and as inclusive as possible. Ty will probably go into this in more detail tomorrow, but we were using 3 main definitions when we were looking at how to describe Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews. One of them would be geographic, referring to Jews from certain regions of the world. One would be in reference to halachot and minhagim, different religious practices that people from certain areas will practice. And then the other one will be about more specific communities. So people might identify as a specific group based on where they're from or based on their cultural or historical background, rather than as part of a broader Sephardi family. And to that, we say we are looking at all of these definitions as valid and mutually inclusive, because the goal is to facilitate openness and understanding, and to be inclusive of all people, all families who consider themselves members of the Sephardi Mizrahi community. I'll pause for questions. Okay. Okay, the next page is called Using This Guide. This is my personally my favorite page because this is where educators will have the opportunity to take a self-assessment. In order to know where you want to go, you have to first know where you are. And what this page does is provides a set of questions that educators, mostly school leaders, but teachers also can use in order to really take a look inward. The thing about cultural assumptions is that we often don't realize that we have them because we take them for granted. They are assumed. And what the questions in this guide do is hold up a mirror so that you can see, oh, here are things that I maybe didn't notice before about my school. And then you can use the items in this self-assessment in order to decide how you're then going to proceed to use the rest of the information in this toolkit. So the most important thing to keep in mind when you're assessing your school culture is to say, who are we? In other words, when we're talking about issues of inclusion, when the school leadership or other people who represent the school use the word we, who are they speaking about? Are they talking about all of the students? Are they talking about some of the students? Are they talking about all families or only some families? So all of these questions in the self-assessment are intended to help you identify, well, who are you talking about when you say we? And we have self-assessment in the areas of curriculum and teacher knowledge, language use. So for example, if teachers throw out Yiddish expressions in their class, do they also throw out Ladino expressions? As an example, programming, what kind of programming and speakers are made available, and to what extent do they account for diversity among the student body? In terms of prayer services, which liturgies are used, which Siddurim are made available, physical spaces, whose portraits are on the wall, which events and which moments in Jewish history are celebrated or are memorialized on the walls, and representation in terms of leadership roles, in terms of promotional materials, which members of the school community are represented there. So these are some examples of things that you can look at, and I encourage you to all examine all of those questions in more detail. For the recommendation, which is the bulk of the site, we have broken down recommendations by various stakeholders. So we have recommendations for programming staff. That would be people who, for example, run trips, run clubs, run special programs that happen in schools, like they might bring in speakers, they might do certain activities. Recommendations for families, recommendations for guidance staff, so that's social workers, school psychologists, anybody involved in the social emotional well-being of students, recommendations for lay leaders, and recommendations for school leaders. I'll just click on this one as an example. So for school leaders, there will be different categories of things that school leaders might want to focus on, with a heading in bold, and then more detailed descriptions in the smaller font. So for example, how might a school leader designate personnel, time, and funds to support these inclusion initiatives? And then we have specific recommendations that school leaders, can use. And again, these are all recommendations that do not necessarily have to all be taken in an all or nothing sort of fashion. So after school leaders or teachers do that self-assessment, they can then say, okay, well, based on where I am now, let me use the specific recommendations on the site to see where I want to go and to pull out the things that are of most use to me. The bulk of the recommendation section is for classroom teachers. And for classroom teachers, we have some general recommendations that we think are good practice for all teachers who want to make more inclusive school environments and make more inclusive classrooms. These relate to asking students about their roots, creating culturally competent learning experiences, integrating Sephardi Mizrahi heritage into curricula, designing inclusive physical spaces, and then weaving Sephardi Mizrahi content into the discipline. And as we did for the other one, for the school leaders, there are more detailed recommendations if you click down in the box. If you scroll further down, we have recommendations broken up by discipline: Tanakh, Halachot, Minhagim, and Tefillah, Israel, Jewish history, Holocaust, arts and music, literature, STEM. And then we also have a page of additional resources that are about Sephardi Mizrahi heritage in general, or that can point you to additional information if you so wish. And I think Ty is going to be focusing on all of these content pages in the follow-up session tomorrow. So that is the toolkit. We think of curriculum in terms of what is included in the actual class content on the syllabus as a facet of school culture. I always say to my students when I teach about curriculum design that curriculum reflects your selection criteria. What are the criteria that you use when you determine what should or should not be taught and what is or is not included in the curriculum? And the goal behind these pages is to broaden that selection criteria and perhaps even help teachers to refine the selection criteria that they use so that when they are deciding what to include or what not to include in their classroom, they have the rich diversity of the Jewish community in mind. Okay, Ty or Sarah or Safir, whoever's over to you.
I have a question, Alana, and then even though tomorrow's session is focused on content, if there are people here who can't join tomorrow and who have specific questions about content, Ty's here, so this is an opportunity to ask Ty questions as well. And I don't know, you may have touched on this a little bit, but one thing that I learned in this whole process from having many conversations with you is that I think there's this perception that school culture and content are separate from each other, but you kind of pushed me to think very differently about that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, thank you. So I touched on it at the end. I will just deepen a little bit. It's very hard to measure the culture of an institution because for the most part, it's unspoken. It's very often unconscious and everything is assumed. And we don't even know what we don't know, right? Because when you're raised in a certain environment, it's very hard to see that there are things in the world that do not operate in that same way. So how do you measure school culture? One of the ways you can do that is by looking at behaviors of the people who operate within that institution. And another way is by looking at the artifacts that that institution generates. So physical objects or pieces of writing, things like that, that can kind of point to an underlying value. And the way that I see it, a curriculum is a form of a cultural artifact because it does have these selection criteria that demonstrate what sorts of material the teachers or the administrators have thought this is valuable and I want to include it in my curriculum. And in that sense, a curriculum is an expression of the values of the institution. So if the curriculum presents Judaism as a one-size-fits-all model, or it presents Jews as one-size-fits-all, and this is what Judaism looks like, that is communicating a value about Judaism, and then students will take that as a value with them in their lives. But if the curriculum demonstrates something different, then that communicates a different value about what we think is important for students to know and think about Jews around the world.
Thanks. Are there questions for Ty or Alana? You can also just unmute yourself if you like to.
I have a bigger question more for everybody. Thank you all for participating. I hope you can join me tomorrow as well at 11:30 PST. My bigger question for anybody that would like to jump in on this is like what kind of Sephardic education, Mizrahi education is already being used in your schools? My assumption is that like maybe you include Sephardic and Mizrahi studies when it comes to holidays. Are there other places where you're using Sephardic history or Sephardic perspectives of Judaism?
Hi, I'm Abby Kerbal. I'm from the Gesher Jewish Day School in Fairfax, Virginia. I mostly know about my own classrooms, and there's a little bit. I'm the director of Jewish Life, but I don't have curricular oversight over the school. I know that I have been integrating more Sephardi and Mizrahi, particularly history, in Jewish history classes. I have a whole unit on, the rise of Islam and Jews under Islam, and so there's a whole unit that I do with them. They have a project where they have to look at the history of Jews of Arab lands and sort of come up with a little, cultural heritage tour of what would you show to do that. It is started to come out a little bit more, I would say, in some of the rabbinics pieces that we do. We're a pluralistic school. So it's not just thinking about Sephardi and Mizrahi culture, but also, conservative, Orthodox, Reform, Reconstructionist, unaffiliated. And so I know that particularly in some of my life cycle units in rabbinics, I've been attempting to incorporate a little bit more of, Sephardi naming traditions versus Ashkenazi naming traditions, Sephardi wedding, Mizrahi wedding traditions versus Ashkenazi wedding traditions. So it's in there primarily in our middle school. I'm not so sure how it's in a classroom curriculum of our other Judaics teachers in the building. I will say though that also on a school-wide level, we have been trying to shift that culture a little bit more. The first day we come back from Pesach break this year and last year, we have a little mimuna to welcome the students back from Pesach. We're trying our best to incorporate things a little more where we are.
Thank you, Abby. I put a link in for our Jewish history page, and definitely encourage everybody to visit our page on Halachot and Minhagim, which includes a lot of holiday selections as well. I'd also be curious, not just like what people's experience are today of trying to incorporate Sephardic and Mizrahi heritage, but for those of you that went to Jewish day schools, did you receive anything back in your day? I can speak for like I didn't attend a Jewish day school, but even like going to college in the 90s, like I took one Jewish American women's history course and waited patiently until the end of the semester, expecting I'd learn a little something about related to my family or Jews anywhere from like Turkey to Algeria to Iran. And
Laura, you were
I'm
going to
still
say
waiting.
something.
I was going to say that I had the great fortune of going to Tehiyah Day School in El Cerrito, no longer in existence, but Rabbi Tzipi Gabbai was first my teacher and then became the head of the Hebrew and Jewish Studies department. And it was very normative for me to have her, even though she's from Israel, her family is all from Morocco and a dynasty of rabbis, to have like the Moroccan culture so deeply incorporated in our Jewish learning, in all of the melodies, And a lot of the stories that were shared, I remember learning as a student about Rambam, Maimonides, and different different figures who are now escaping me because I am currently with my 2-month-old baby. So can't name drop all the great Rabbanim, but just that was part of my upbringing. I'm really lucky. And then I feel like Warnick, where I worked as well, also is incorporating a lot of awareness around Mizrahim in the 7th grade, learning about the Golden Age in Spain, and also the synagogue project in 6th grade of visiting different synagogues in the Bay Area, which we're lucky to have, some of which are Sephardi. Maybe that's an exception, though.
I think I can say, because Jimena is based in the San Francisco Bay Area, that we are in an exceptional community. The Sephardi Mizrahi population here is really strong, but this is a community that has always embraced diversity and inclusion, I think, in many areas. So Tzapi Gabai is a powerhouse, amazing educator and community leader. And I think that's another benefit that we can look into, is that Jimena does have a network of amazing Sephardi educators like Tzapi throughout the United States, and we're happy to make like a shidduch and connect schools to different rabbis and educators if there's a desire for that. Are there any other questions or comments or thoughts before we wrap it up?
I just have a lingering thought around, since you started, Sarah, by saying you went to public school. I'm just wondering, I mean, maybe this is not part of this conversation, but I am thinking, like, how could these materials serve teachers who are thinking about Jewish Heritage Month coming up in May, who are not at a Jewish day school, and if there is any resource?
Yeah, there is. So because I'm a product of public school, and I feel like I'm one of the rare Jewish communal professionals that's committed to keeping my children in public school, I am always thinking about public school, even before I'm thinking about Jewish day school. We worked with an organization and adapted one of the lessons from the Journey to the Mizrach curriculum for public. And I think all of our materials can actually be adapted for public. We worked with the US Department of Education and with the California Department of Education on their recent initiatives to address anti-Semitism, but we used it as an opportunity to promote and share resources for public educators on Middle Eastern Jews, Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews. And the US Department of Education actually, in their countering anti-Semitism strategy, included the recommendation of teaching public school students about Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews and Jewish refugees. And in response to that, we curated state-approved lesson plans. We have a whole collection of those. But then we also have our, more Jewishly oriented educational content that can easily be adapted. And for Jewish American Heritage Month, I'm not sure that in 2024 there's a better organization for the public to come to than Jimena for learning about diverse Jewish experiences and contributions, not just in the United States, but around the world as well. So we were kind of, like I said from the beginning, we launched as an organization that was committed to just sharing personal stories on college campuses, so in public spaces. And that is like our DNA and the essence of what we've done. Venturing into Jewish education is actually a more recent effort of ours in terms of broad education. We have a lot of experience now working in different public educational settings, but it is very kind of exciting for me that I feel like it took 20 years, I mean, way more than that, because Sephardi Jews have been here for so long. It took so long for our public departments of education to recognize that this is a part of Jewish heritage and history that's not being taught in our public schools and should be taught in our public schools. So in some ways, it's like I see in my brain this like these two like competing roads, right? Like if the public schools are teaching our stories, and if their leaders are actively advocating for the inclusion of Sephardi history and heritage, then our Jewish schools have so much catching up to do.
I'll just add to that, Sarah. Like, I think the biggest inroad for us for public schools is probably in the Holocaust education. Would you agree? And that like our Holocaust history page will provide a lot of resources that are not currently being used in American schools when they teach about Holocaust and genocide. And then thinking about your question about American Jewish History Month, I encourage everybody to visit our history page, which we dedicated quite a bit of resources to talking about Jewish synagogues established in Philadelphia and in Rhode Island, and like kind of more of the colonial period, as well as like in the early 20th century, talking about the building of Jewish communities here where I'm in Seattle and in Los Angeles, as well as in New York and Georgia. So plenty that we could add and expand upon what people generally view of as the Jewish American experience.
Thanks, Ty, and thank you, Alana. Are there any other questions or comments? I just want to say too, like coming from public schools and having had all these years now worked with rabbis and educators and parents, that I think this has been a really daunting task. And there has been this awakened awareness for the need for of the need for for inclusion of diverse Jewish histories into not just our education institutions in our schools, but broadly across like the Jewish communal ecosystem. And it is daunting, but no educator, no institution, no organization is alone. We have in our resource section on all of our educational sites, like long lists of other organizations and curriculum and other resources that are available. So any organization that wants to do more, even if it's baby steps, is really bolstered and supported by a multitude of organizations and educators. And we're doing this all together, right? Like that's part of pushing all this work and pushing the field of Jewish education and Jewish inclusion forward is trial and error. We have an educator who actually was one of the first to pilot our initial curriculum here. She's not paying any attention, which is fine. And her feedback was amazing. Like we're really all in this together. So thank you all for joining. And you can reach out to any of us at any time. And I put in the chat prior, but this is a fluid evolving document. So if you look at it and you're like, wait, it doesn't have this on, this is missing on the site, let us know, because we do want to add as much as we can. Oh, Sarah Benor is raising her hand. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, I just wanted to point out that, first of all, thank you. This is so great. And the work you're doing is so needed right now. I just noticed on your website, it's the toolkit is all over the homepage, but it's not yet listed in the menus at the top. And I was looking for it the other day and couldn't find it. So like in your menu at the top where it says resources, it's not, I don't see it there.
Thank you for letting us know. One of the problems that Jimena has is that we are such a content-rich organization with limited capacity. So there's a lot of gaps and holes like that that exist. Thanks for telling us. We'll add that right now, or I'll add that right now. Oh, no, if you go into programs on jimena.org, education and engagement, the education toolkit is there, but it should be very prominent. So thank you, Sarah.
And I'll just point out that like everybody should definitely be in contact with Sarah and all the great work that they're doing on Jewish language projects, and they're definitely on our list of resources that everybody should be taking advantage of.
Thank you, Ty. Oh,
Okay,
and
everyone,
sorry, I'll also mention that Drora Arusi is also here, who runs the Unity Through Diversity initiative, which also has some great resources like short films.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. We'll talk.
Okay, I put Ty's email address into the chat. He is our director of education and the point person for all of your work on this going forward. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you have a wonderful spring. We'll have a repeat of this talk, well, not a repeat, but the second part of this talk tomorrow, which is focused really on kind of the nuts and bolts and the content. And it's like my favorite part of all of this because I'm learning from it. So it's just another great resource out in the universe. So thank you all for joining. Have a great day. We will hopefully see you all again. Bye.
Bye.